All righty. Thanks, guys, for joining us again. For those of you that were with us on Saturday, thanks for hanging out with us, within a 5-day period, putting up with Steve and I. We have Ian Spanier, who is an amazing human being. We've been hanging out and we've been chatting for a while, so I'm very excited for everybody to get to know him. I've already warned Ian, like, I'm going to let Ian introduce himself. I figure he can do a better job than I can reading off of a list. He's got a lot of amazing work, so I know that you guys are going to learn a lot. If you have questions, please put them in the chat and we'll pick up on those as we go. Ian, it's all yours, buddy. Take it away.
Of course, Troy told me that before I had a chance to print out my whole bio, so I don't know anything anymore, but I'm just kidding. So my name is Ian Spanier, and I'm a professional photographer here in Los Angeles via New York. That is where I'm from. I've been out here for about 7 years. This is my second stint out here. I tried it about 17 years ago and absolutely hated it. Didn't even last 2 years. Went right back to New York. But I love it this time, and I'm here to stay for quite a while, I hope. And today, I think we're going to spend a little time talking about lighting on location, which is primarily what I do. I do quite a bit of studio work, but the bulk of my work tends to be lighting on location, and that includes building studios on location. So I thought what we would do is kind of run through sort of everything I do, a little bits and pieces of all of it, some advice for all you guys about how I approach the jobs that I do. The ground rules are such, I am a very open book. You guys can ask me anything, whether it's on topic or off topic. There's no wrong question for me. I love to answer anything I can do, whether it's from how I run my business to how I am a photographer, how I became a photographer, the equipment I use, all that good stuff. So feel free. The guys are going to be monitoring the chat and are instructed totally fine with me to interrupt as I'm going to answer questions. I do want to try to get through all this information for you guys. So I hope you have paper and pencil to take some notes, because there will be some stuff in here that I hope you will want to write down. So let's just dive into it. Yep, go
Ian,
for it.
let me interrupt you really quick for 1 second, and which is going to throw Troy off because I know that he's spotlighting videos as he goes. But Ian's been on my podcast before, and so I just want to make sure that people understand you've got 2 books out. Are they? I'm assuming they're still in print, right?
I believe so, yes. It's Local Heroes, which is portraits of volunteer firefighters, which you can find on Amazon, and the Playboy Guide to the Manufacturing of Cigars. That one's a little trickier to find. If you're a cigar smoker, you can sometimes find it in some of the finer cigar shops. There are some copies out there by Skyhorse Publishing, also possibly on Amazon, but it is out there in the world. You can also find some of my own publications that I used to make my own magazine, which is on Blurb, and you can find those via my website or on Blurb.
And then you also, are you still Westcott Pro? I know you're still involved with Westcott, Low Pro Bags.
Yes.
And you were a brand ambassador for Hoodman, and the title slide that you've got has a platypod in it, because I know you're involved with Larry and everybody from Platypod too.
So a few things have changed. I'm not working with Platypod anymore, but I did help Larry out for quite a bit of time there at the beginning. I am a top pro with Westcott. I'm no longer with Low Pro. They ended the program, unfortunately, that I was working with, but I just signed with Think Tank Photo, and I'm super happy about that. They make some great bags, and I've been just now starting to get them on set, which has been fantastic, and testing them all out. Yes, I work with Hoodman, and they make some fantastic CF Express cards, which are in my Canon R5 that I've been using this year. So I just upgraded to that. I also work with a mask company now that our new world is mask covered. So I work with Nauru Global for that. I do some work with Sekonic for light meters, which I think every photographer should have. So if you don't, please put that on your list. You should have one. And Cam Ranger, which we were talking about before the show started, which has been legit a way for me to keep working through this whole change of the world. And I was telling the guys a story about how I utilized it as a means of creating a new way of working that I was kind of already doing, but now I've been able to shoot even at my home with clients in other states, and they've been able to watch the shoot live and receive images in real time as we're shooting. And then my other really thrilled to be working with product is Spider and Spider Pro, and they make fantastic accessories for all kinds of cameras, belt systems, hand grips, so many good little accessories that just help us get the job done. So all of those things, if you do follow me on Instagram, you will see I offer discounts quite often. So I'm glad you brought that up.
Perfect.
Because I do always want to offer that out to everybody.
And I know Troy's involved with Spider too, so that's perfect. I'm sorry. So you can go ahead.
Great. All right.
Back
Yeah,
to the regularly scheduled program.
Yeah.
Good stuff.
I'll be honest, guys. I never like to be a human advertisement, but there are a lot of products, and I do love to share the use of those products and how I use those products. So on Instagram, I do spend a lot of time explaining how I did this shot and why I use this accessory and the gear that I use. And I really only talk about stuff that I actually use, because I'm an honest guy. What can I tell you? Okay, so let's dive into lighting on location. Our job as a photographer is so much more than just pointing a camera in a particular direction and pressing a button. Whether you're a photographer who works with lighting or not, the making of a photograph literally does not exist without light. For anyone who's heard me speak before, I preach over and over about going in with a plan, and truly believe that sets you up for success. I've kept a notebook of my sets since the start of my career, and I continue to do so today. The pages contain what I like to call my quote unquote bag of tricks. And I believe that we all need these tricks as photographers for those situations that constitute the variables of our job. Weather, non-functioning lights, low ceilings, power outages, reflections, low budgets. These are the things that we all face when we're on any given assignment. And facing these challenges, and I do call them challenges, not problems, is a matter of building your own bag of tricks so that when you face them, you have the answers to get the job done and keep your clients. So let's begin with my 3 rules of shooting on location. If you can scout, scout. Now, the reason I say this is that it's something that's kind of gone away from our business. It used to be, we always would scout locations beforehand. We'd get a sense of what we'd be dealing with, what kind of challenges, not problems, we are going to have to overcome on the day of the shoot. And that can vary from low ceilings to tight hallways, even though the client wants you to shoot in a hallway, to having your set up exactly where the cafeteria is nearby and everybody's going to come through at a certain time. All of these things happen, and until you have that experience, you really don't know what you're going to do when it does occur. I've been on shoots where we've set everything up, including a seamless background and lights and everything, and then told, oh, I'm sorry, there's a meeting in here, you can't be in here, and you have 5 minutes to go redo your set somewhere else. These are the things that happen. So being prepared beforehand is critical. Now, that all said, budgets today, not necessarily going to allow for it. You might be shooting in a location where you're flying into, and the only way you can get there is that day or maybe the night before it. So you're not going to get a chance to see what natural light is doing at that location. Now, we do have a lot of tools to our hands, right in our hand, I should say, which is, sun-seeking apps and all sorts of prediction apps that allow us to sort of know what we're dealing with, which, we didn't have 15, 20 years ago. Those things all help, but I would still always argue if there's an ability to scout beforehand, you should. Now, if you cannot scout, ask questions. And I think a lot of photographers are afraid to do this. This is our job. This is our job to know what we're going to be dealing with so that we have the answers. And that is the key to keeping those clients, making them happy on the day of the shoot, showing them that you do not sweat, showing them that you have the answers for anything that comes down the pipe that you're going to have to deal with. So we'll go into some exact details of how I do this with some of the samples that I'm going to show you. But essentially what it comes down to is sort of this checklist of things that you're going to want to know before you walk into any given situation. And like I said, once we start diving into some of the examples, you'll see exactly how I approach certain aspects if I'm at an office, or if I'm at a gym location, or if I'm outdoors on location. So we'll dive into that one a little bit more. And the third rule is to be prepared. I am somebody that does not take a lot of equipment on shoots. I take just what I need, and sometimes just a little bit more. So I always have my main camera and a backup. I always have at least 2 lenses. I always have backup batteries. More than anything else is backup batteries. I have 2 chargers for my camera batteries. One could always break. I usually bring 5 to 6 lights total, unless I'm doing a very small shoot where I know I'm only going to be using, let's say, 1 light. And in those cases, I will bring 2 to 3 lights, and that is it. And I do all this so I have just what I need in a very compact amount, and a spare if I can. Now, there are cases where I've had to travel overseas or to foreign countries where I literally could only go in with 2 lights and not nearly enough power to overpower the sun. And you have to figure out solutions for these things. So having solutions to the challenges that you're going to be facing is critical. And again, we're going to go into that a little bit deeper once we start looking at some of these examples.
Can I interrupt you for a second?
Absolutely.
You said something that's intriguing to me. You said, you'll take at least 2 lenses and 2 batteries, and or more, as many batteries, and at least 2 chargers, but 5 lights. Is your intent to almost always use 5 lights, or are you taking lights that are different for different uses? Which, or both?
So the reason I say 5 is typically that I know most of the shoots that I do, for me, I'm going to have that possibility that I'm going to have to light a backgrounds. So that's 2 lights right there. I'm going to have it 1 or 2 lights on my subject. One of those lights goes down. Now I have a spare. So that's 5. Now, when I know, as I mentioned, that I'm going in with the plan to shoot 1 light, which I do quite a lot, 1 light and 2 light solutions are a big part of my business. In those cases, I typically will travel with either 2 or 3 lights, and that's it. So it's just a whittled down version of the 5. But I sort of figured out when I moved out here that it wasn't cost effective for me to always be renting equipment. So I have enough equipment to do most of the jobs that I do, so that if I'm not billing for equipment, it's not costing me on that day. I've already built in to the business that I've spent the money on that. Now, working with these lighting companies obviously helps me a bit. And I've added some stuff that I wouldn't necessarily run out and go buy because I've had to test it, or I've been fortunate enough to be in a position where I get a discount or whatever the case may be. But it always comes down to needing more power. That is generally what happens. And I always want to make sure that I've got enough. If you are in a situation where the client wants you to overpower the sun and you only have 2 400 watt heads, you may not be able to do that. I don't shoot at low apertures, so sometimes I will need f11 and not want to jack up the ISO necessarily, although these days it is getting much easier. So there's all sorts of different variables, but I'm sort of basing that number on what I needed. Cool. Okay, so just quickly, just wanted to showcase some of the gear that I use from Westcott. I would say that in the last year to 2 years, I have come to rely on umbrellas tremendously, particularly in this last year where I've been working alone a lot. And the reason that I've come to love these umbrellas is really the portability aspect of them. It's less gear and I can do a lot with it. I can change my style very much so based on which umbrella, which diffusion. I tend to go with the silver interiors. It just matches my style a bit more, but that's, in the eye of the beholder. I get asked constantly the question, if you only had 1 modifier to bring onto a deserted island, which would it be? And I typically will say that the 24-inch rapid box beauty dish is my go-to. I can do about 6 to 9 different styles with it. And because of that versatility, it's super useful to me. The FJ400, which is the new light series from Westcott, I've come to love. A lot less expensive than some of its competitors, and very powerful, very great battery life. So can't say enough good things about it. They just released the FJ80 and FJ200, which I also have been really happy with. So just wanted to quickly run through that stuff. All right, so let's take a look at some examples. First case study I will talk about is the open space, and I say ish for a reason. Everybody always tells you it's an open space, oh, you'll have plenty of room and all this stuff, but it's not always the case. Quite often there are situations where there is things that prevent you from actually having a clear open space. So in these situations, you need to assess the situation. And what I mean by that is when I walk into any room, usually what I do first is this, and I look straight up, because I want to know how high are those ceilings. I want to know, are there, even though the client might have said, well, the ceilings are 18 foot high, but then you walk in there and there are lights dangling down 9 of those 18 feet. So really you only have 9 feet. Or there might be air conditioning pipes, or there might be a huge pillar in the middle of the room that you might not have been told about, because nobody who's going there for you is going to anticipate the things that might hinder you from doing the job correctly. The other thing I'll look at is the floor. And the reason I do that is because if it's carpet and I'm meant to put down a seamless, then my clients, if they're wearing high-heeled shoes, are going to go right through that seamless. So that means I need to either bring in plywood or plastic flooring, something to put under the seamless. Or let's say it's a conference room and there is a big table in there, and the client didn't think about the fact that that table weighs 300 pounds and has wires with phone lines connected to the floor that you can't remove. These are all real things that happen. Other big aspect, of course, in open rooms is the possibility of windows that don't have shades, and this happens quite a lot. So in this case, I had high ceilings and plenty of room, which were the positives. The negative was that this was a working factory. So there was people all around. There was a lot of noise. There was a lot of cords hanging from the ceiling. There was lots of things going on that could distract my subject, that could affect the shoot. My piece of advice whenever you're given the open space is to ask for more, but be prepared for less. And the reason I always say this is that I will tell clients typically, even if I know I'm going in with, let's say, a 9-foot seamless, I will tell them I need 16 feet of space left and right in order to accommodate my background. Now, I won't say 9-foot background, I will say my background, because they're not going to do the math of what the stands are going to take up. They're not going to do the math of if I have to light that background, those stands plus the lights. What if you're using V flats as well and you need to fit that into the space and you need to use every inch of that 9 foot? So these are all things that I'm going to push for in those cases. Now, when I get less than that 16 foot, I know I can still squeeze into these things because I've done it so many times. So here's a BTS shot of our space. So as I mentioned, it's a working factory. You can see that, there's a lot of stuff going on in the background. There was numerous rooms that we could go to. I pretty much chose the best case scenario. Now, to my right are all the factory workers working at their tables. To my left was more of a storage room, but it was much narrower. And you can actually see a little white thing hanging down from the top underneath the orange doorway. And that is some stuff that was hanging down from the ceiling. And all of that made me hesitant to working in that room. The only thing hanging down from the room that we ended up in was just some electric plugs. And you can see one of them dangling off the edge of my light there. So no big deal because it was a movable piece. Now, the result of this is here. Now, what I always hope, and again, it's hope, that you or anybody else might look at this image and assume that it was shot in a studio and not have any idea that we're in a working factory with buzz saws going off and noises and all sorts of other distractions. I pride myself very much so on the idea that what is going on that day is not your client's problem. It's not your client's concern that it's a difficult shoot this way, that it would be much better to be in a studio that's controlled environment. None of that matters. This all stems back to a lot of my teachings from my mentor, who's a guy called Harry Benson, who, if you're not familiar with, please look him up. He legit is the Where's Waldo of history. He has photographed every president from Eisenhower to Trump and been at all sorts of world events, from the Civil War, the Civil Rights March to starvation in Africa to the recording of We Are the World, Michael Jackson, the Reagans, all sorts of up and down. He's just been everywhere, done everything. He was in the hotel of the ambassador in LA when Robert Kennedy was shot, and he has the famous picture of Ethel Kennedy putting her hand up to the camera. What Harry would beat into my skull was that it is your job to bring the job home. And I've a very different career than Harry, but I still have that mentality that it's my job to bring the job home, and I don't care what's in my way to get it done, I'm going to get it done. So if we take another look from a slightly different angle of our set, this was kind of a second version of our set. You can see sort of the clutter and the noise that's going on in the background. And again, the results, which again, I hope say this could be a studio, a very quiet moment. Nobody would know that the buzz saws are going off and all the other stuff going on. Now, this applies everywhere I go. This shoot was actually a totally different assignment. I was doing a bunch of people who were attending an event, and the photo editor came up and said, "Oh, you're going to shoot Jeff Bridges in 5 minutes." And I was like, "Wait, what?" Now we had this setup already arranged for everybody else, and we were kind of just doing sort of a photo booth of portraits throughout the 2-day conference that was going on. And we are in the tiniest corner of a green room at this hotel with really low ceilings, as you can see. So I made the decision that all my subjects would pretty much sit unless they were not very tall. And I used the X-drop backgrounds from Westcott in order to create my own set. That black V-flat that you see on the left of the frame is actually covering up a giant mirror that's on the wall there that was reflecting my lights. So obviously I'm trying to create a controlled environment as best as possible, again, to create that look that I'm in a studio, even though I'm not. And here's the result. So really what it comes down to—
that's the shot that we covered on the podcast.
Oh, yes, that's right. Yes, yeah, correct. Really what it comes down to is this idea that it's my job to get the job done. And the variables and the obstacles are nobody's problem but mine to overcome. And that's, again, why I call them challenges, not problems, because I'm going to look at them as things that I just need to overcome. And it's going to challenge me to do the very simple job of setting a light up to do a portrait of somebody. Okay, so case number 2. And again, fire away with questions as we're going if anything comes up. And if I speak too quickly, that's my New Yorker still in me, so sorry about that. Let's talk about outdoors. So the scenario here is a solo shoot outside in downtown LA with no stands and no assistant. I decided that the prospect of doing this alone was not a challenge enough, so we had to add to that shooting at night. Now, again, going back to what I said at the beginning, we always face the challenge of light, and light is our vehicle for being photographers. So when you remove that, very much so, it creates a new challenge. But I love a challenge, and that's who I am. as if that wasn't enough, and I know anyone who's not in the California area might not, or maybe if you're Northern California, understand it. But if you live in New York and you're watching this, you might say, oh, well, it's never cold in California. It was absolutely freezing. It was something like 40 degrees. And I'll personally tell you that 60 degrees is cold for me in LA. I'm very thin blood at this point, I guess, but this one was legit cold. I mean, it was really cold. And now I have a model who's going to be scantily clad, and expect her to put the best face on, even though we are going to be freezing. So with that added challenge, I needed to make sure that she stayed as warm as possible before I started taking any pictures, and that I had to have my setup ready to go, that the moment she stepped on set, I'm firing and I'm nailing shots. I am not making mistakes. I am not wasting anybody's time. So the key for me on any situation like this, and most situations anyway, is to pre-plan what I'm going to do. So I test my lights. I test the idea that I have. I script out exactly what I'm going to do before I get there. And then when I get there, I make that quick assessment of what do I have that's going to stop me from doing my plan. And I will promise you that better than 90% of the time when I walk into these situations, everything I planned works out just fine, because I anticipated those challenges being something I would have to overcome.
Question. Yeah, before you go and show the result of this, it's a good time for David's question, because David asked, like you mentioned, you normally take so many lights and so many batteries and so many bodies and backups, etc. But what gear, where's this question? What gear, camera, or lenses do you typically use?
Okay, so I'm a Canon shooter. I've been for a very long time. I waited a very long time to go digital on purpose. I wanted to wait until the full frame technology was there. Some people who might be watching this didn't even know that was something that happened at some point in our history. So I stuck with film a very long time. And during that time, in order to accommodate to the desire from clients to work with photographers who are shooting digital, I was actually shooting film and converting it to digital and providing it to them as if it was digital files. I did that for quite a while, and nobody knew the better. So when I made the change, I had already had a 35 millimeter camera from Canon, so I had lenses. So it was a pretty easy decision, combined with the fact that they made a full frame camera right away. So most of my jobs are Canon. Every so often, if I have to do something medium format or large format, then I would rent camera backs or whatever the case may be. But honestly, these files are so huge at this point. I've had 35-foot billboards on Sunset Boulevard in California shot out of a 5D Mark IV, and no problem that you could walk up to that thing and it was tack sharp. So output's very important, and knowing how to treat your files in post, I think, is very important. It's not politically correct as much as it used to be, I guess, but I always say it's the Indian, not the arrow. So, it's kind of how I see it. I do some video jobs with an iPhone. So it's, it doesn't matter so much what you use, I guess is my point. It's what you feel comfortable with and what you're happy shooting with. I'm very used to the Canon system, so I've stuck with it. And I just, as I mentioned, upgraded to an R5, and I took a long time to go mirrorless. I did not like the technology, but I'm absolutely loving this R5, I will tell you. And the AI in it is, I've been shooting on set for the last couple of weeks, doing behind the scenes stuff, and being able to catch focus on people that in a very tricky lighting situation when I can't move around as much as I normally would be is really a benefit, and the amount of focus points and all that stuff is great. So
what about lenses?
That question. Typically I shoot with a 24-70. That's probably my go-to lens. I got the new one for the R5. I still have my old one for the 5D Mark IV. I have an 85 millimeter 1.8 that is over 20 years old. I've only had it fixed once, thankfully, which was, I jinxed myself 2 years ago by saying this was my oldest lens that I still use. But that is one of my go-to portrait lenses that I use. 50 millimeter 1.2, I really have that just for the speed. And I have a 105, I think, all brand lenses. I don't like to use non-brand lenses. It's just something I do. I'm sure the technology is great these days with the other lenses, but I've always just been very loyal to brands. So that's typically what's in my bag. And that I would say is 99.9% of the time. Okay, so going back to our night scene. So here's our setup. The platypod, which Steve mentioned, I was actually doing this with intent to utilize this. I thought it would be a great way to use this product. We had no permit, so didn't really want to deal with sticks on the ground. I also didn't want to deal with a stand. Now, in an ideal world, I would have had an assistant holding this light and just on a C-stand arm or anything like that. This was a way for me to do it myself. So my right foot, which is not in the frame, is actually holding the bottom of that pole. And I preset the distance. I knew about how far away I could get away with the aperture that I wanted. I set the camera, I set a focus point, and I'm actually firing the camera from my phone via the Cam Ranger app. Now, this was done with the first Cam Ranger. The newer Cam Rangers drones better, but this was a very easy way for me to control everything. I could check focus there. I could check focus on the phone, sorry, I should say, through the app, and I was able to make sure everything was exactly where I wanted. So just off frame is all our stuff, which we basically just, hung off the side of this walkway that goes over the freeway. And her jacket and all the other stuff that was keeping her warm. And again, I told her, jump out there now. And then I just started shooting. So really, it was just a solution to a situation where I would be alone and I wouldn't have any support from anybody else. If you look here, this is all the gear that I brought. So as I mentioned, in the planning process, I'm whittling down to just what I need. There is a backup camera body in that bag. There's a backup lens in that bag. There's a backup trigger in that bag, and that's it. Now, obviously, this is when I was still shooting with Pro Photo. I actually think the Westcott would have been better in this situation because the LED modeling light is much better than that Pro Photo's modeling light was. I would have used it because it wouldn't have drained the battery, whereas the Pro Photo one used to drain that battery very quickly. The Rapid Box I did on purpose because I knew I could put it together very quickly once we got to the top of the stairs in this overpass. So again, there's a lot of intent behind which equipment I'm choosing. Now, the first decision was that I wanted a certain quality of light, a certain style of light. So I chose that Rapid Box strip for a reason. That's the light I wanted. I wanted to mimic the feel of that fluorescent overhead kind of trail of light. So I wanted something that sort of felt natural, and not too out of place. If I went with a different modifier, maybe it wouldn't feel that way. I wouldn't have focused the light in where I wanted it to. Now I do know, of course, I could do some stuff in post, but I'm very much of the mindset that if you get a shot in camera, it's always better because nobody else on set, none of your clients can really imagine it the way that you can imagine it when you're shooting it and know what you can do in post. So I'll purposefully try to get something that's very, very close to the final in my camera if I can. And here's the end result.
Oh, wow.
Thank you.
Question,
Yeah.
Two questions actually that came in, timed perfectly. So Peter asked, first of all, that first shot of behind the scenes where you were holding the light camera on the platypod, did you have somebody else with you that took that shot?
No, I put my iPhone on timer and I quickly threw it over on the side and shot it. So I had two iPhones with me, one to fire the camera and one to take a BTS shot, because I knew I wanted a BTS shot of this, and I knew it would be crazy. But it's literally, if you look at this frame, you can kind of see the railway, the railing on the right. It's just leaning up against that, and I had to guess the framing. That's why my foot's cut off. In an ideal world, you would have seen my right foot as well.
Even a behind the shot, you're worried about your crop. I love it. So,
Course,
and then
yeah.
Amy asked a really good question, and that is, like, looking at this finished shot here, I love this scene. What gets Ian to decide, or how does Ian find a location like a pedestrian bridge going over a freeway?
Sure. So this is a model I've worked with a number of times. We actually worked together for Danskin in New York for numerous shoots, and then she just happened to move to LA. And so when she moved out, we were kind of talking about doing a shoot, and I was doing this stuff with Platypod. So I sort of said, oh, let me think of an idea of something. And I was actually driving down the freeway at night, and I saw the overpass, and I just thought how cool that beam of light going down the center looked, and I got to shoot something up there. And so she and I talked about a number of ideas to shoot in there. One of them, which we sort of chickened out, one because it was so cold, but two because I was really concerned that we were going to get in trouble for shooting up there. But we had those smoke bombs, you know, the sticks that just like let out a shit ton of smoke, and we had this idea of filling that whole thing with smoke and that beam of light going down the middle and all that. Maybe if I had an assistant with me, I would have pushed it, but yeah, I was a little hesitant to get in. I didn't want the fine, basically, is what it comes down to, especially doing a shoot that I wasn't doing for a client. Cool. All right, so let's move on to case study number 3, another outdoor shoot. All right, so this one, we're going to be shooting fitness models at various outdoor locations, all times of day. So we're going to be facing the challenge of where is the sun? It's not always going to be magic hour. It's not always going to be great. And how are we going to do that? And what I would call running gun style, which means that we're not going to be putting stands down. We don't have 3 assistants running equipment. We don't have a huge crew. This happens a lot, obviously, and more these days we've been talking about. But it essentially means that it's a mobile situation. So I need to be able to move from spot A to spot B to spot C, getting all this stuff done in a day, keeping my model's energy up, keeping my clients happy. A lot of things to deal with on these very, challenging shoots. The positive, I would say, was that it was a loose shot list. Now, the positive of that really is that nobody's saying it has to be this, and this is the only thing that we can do, and it has to be perfect light and this and all these other things. So that's where you get some of the nice aspects of it being loose, that I can sort of make some dictation as to how I'm going to accomplish the shot each time. Equally, that's a negative. When you have loose shot lists, it means you can't necessarily plan for the things that you want to plan for. It means that clients can throw variables at you. Ideas will be coming out of left field, and now you're going to have to figure out very quickly what you're going to do to overcome those added challenges. So the old rule of thumb always applies. Keep it simple, stupid. And it works really, really well. That is one of those things that just allows you to minimize the things that will deter you from being able to get the job done. And remember, that is rule number 1, bring the job home. No matter what it is, bring the job home. So here's our set. And this was just the first one. And I think this was very, very early in the morning. The sun hadn't risen yet. And essentially what I came up with was that I was going to have a mobile light stand, which is my assistant. And we would work at certain distances, and depending on what available light was doing, I would make changes to the lighting and how it would fit. Even though I'm lighting it, I'd be using natural light as a part of what I'm doing. Now, when I mentioned about that being stuck on the deserted island and going to the old reliable, this is a perfect scenario for that. I know that that Rapid Box Beauty dish is very versatile. And because of that, I know that that's the one I'm going to count on to get job A, B, C, D, E, F, G all done in one day when things are changing. Those clouds are not going to be there all day. The sun is not always going to be at the perfect angle. These are the variables that I'm going to be dealing with. So I want a light modifier that allows me to create different looks. So here's the results of that one. Now it's a very distinct decision that I'm making on this. I did not want to overpower him with light and make something unrealistic. And yet at the same time, I'm trying to use light to tell a story. Now, again, it is in the eye of the beholder. Everyone could have a different opinion about this. I'm just telling you mine. I look at it from this perspective, that the light that I added here gives the feeling that it's natural light. The other thing that it does is it creates a story for the client. This is all nutrition products. So we've got our model that fits that checkbox. The aspect of him going up instead of down on the bleachers is aspirational. I'm trying to help them sell a product that gets you in better shape. The fact that he's going towards the light is part of trying to tell that story. The fact that the light is sort of, putting him in this position of being a hero. The fact that I'm shooting from low and up is helping to tell that. So, this is all part of the psychology behind how we accomplish jobs for our clients, but that's all the stuff that's going through my head. Now, none of this was planned. None of this was really thought through until the moment we walked up to that location and they said, okay, we need some shots of somebody doing an exercise. What do you think? And then you have to come up with something and come up with the lighting and come up with how you're going to work with the variable that those clouds should be clearing within an hour and all those things that are going on. So again, making it a one light shoot, that kept it simple. Making it one assistant, that kept it simple. Making it one exercise that doesn't involve a lot of equipment, keeping it simple. And this was the very first shot for the first time I was working for this client, and it is going to establish whether I work for them again. So that's why I go at these things in this mentality where I'm going to look at it and say, how can I do this in the most simplistic way, but still make it look like a high-end job and not cheat my client from feeling that they got shortchanged on hiring me.
So Ian, when you're out there shooting, do you have an art director or somebody with you watching the scene? So you do have some kind of input throughout the day.
Good question.
Yes.
I was wondering that.
Sure. So of course, for advertising, always. Editorial, not so much anymore. Used to be. Quite often I get hired for jobs and they say, here's the phone number for your subjects. Go ahead and set it up. Okay, well, what kind of a picture you want? Oh, you know what you're doing. You're good. Okay.
Really?
It took me, and I'm a former photo editor. I was a photo editor for 13 years where I hired photographers and I directed the photographs that were being done for GQ and Esquire and ESPN and Marie Claire and Men's Health and Men's Journal. And I would never do that. I would hire photographers. I'd tell them exactly what I wanted. I am the conduit for the voice of that magazine that I was working for. And now I'm doing jobs for people that are saying to me, you know what you're doing. Here's the phone number to the subject. Go get it set up. You're available Tuesday. They're available Tuesday. Good job. Go get it done. And we need pictures that night. That's how it goes today. So editorial world is what it is. Advertising, of course, has a lot more money behind it, has a lot more pressure behind it. There's a lot of those aspects that are there. What I talked about earlier with how I use the Cam Ranger, that is a big part of how I do what I do. I don't like shooting tethered. This keeps me wire free. I shoot to an iPad. I hand that iPad to my client. I will promise you this. I can't tell you how many shoots I've been on where you are on a big set with, let's say, 5 art directors and managers and stylists and hair and makeup people, and you turn around and everyone's on their phone. The magic trick to beat that is an iPad with images coming through. When I hand them that iPad, it's like they're holding their phone, and now they're looking at the pictures coming through, and I keep their focus on the job, and I get their response to the job. Steve.
Okay, you do that in studio and on location?
Yes.
So you're shooting into Lightroom tethered into a,
No.
Or how are you getting, because the thought that hits me is Lightroom tethered into a collection that's shared through Adobe Cloud, which is coming through Lightroom Mobile. How are you doing that?
What's my rule? Keep it simple, right?
Yeah.
It's too complicated. There's too many variables. No, so CamRanger has its own app, okay? And with that app, you can share it. So you can send it to, I think it's something like 20 or so people could have it on their phone or iPad or whatever. But I bring my iPad. I have, for when we're outside, Hoodman makes an amazing cover for iPads for drone pilots. So I put that on there. So we're shielded from the sun in that case. If I have a digital tech, great, whatever, don't need them always. And if we're indoors, just to simply have the iPad on set, I usually put it on a stand right in front of my client's face. So it's literally, they can't avoid it. And the images are going right to that iPad or to a computer or to an iPhone right there. Boom, shoot it there. Boom, shoot it, shoot it, shoot it. Okay.
Love it.
I don't want to be slowed down by Lightroom. I don't want to be slowed down by Capture One. I don't want any of that. I don't want the, oh, hang on, we're buffering. No, I don't want any of that.
What you're saying, you just said buffering. This works stably, if that's a word, stably in the field.
Yeah, it does. The buffering would be, if you're firing off rapid fire 30 frames per second, yeah, you might get a little bit of a buffer, but truthfully, I don't shoot that style. And even with it, it still comes through. And once it comes through, the client's going to see it anyway. So yeah, and that's how I get that response from them. It beats showing them the back of the camera. Now, if I'm standing in the middle of a lake and my client's right behind me in the lake, I might not have the iPad out there in that case. I might just show them the camera in that case. So there's always, some room for flexibility on this, but I have found this to be a fantastic system that's worked really well for me. And as we were talking about before we started, with the invention of COVID, I recently shot a clothing catalog in my house with myself and 3 different models, each showing up at individual times, so nobody crossed over. And the client was sitting in their living room in Arizona, thanks to CamRanger's capability of being on a shared Wi-Fi network. So they were on Zoom on my computer. The CamRanger images were popping up in real time, so they can conversate with me and the model over Zoom on the laptop as the images that I'm shooting are coming through. So I'm literally shooting and talking at the same time, and they're saying to the model, oh, can you kick your leg higher for this shot? Boom, boom, boom. And it was magic. So really, really great system. Didn't really think to have to need it for a pandemic situation, but it worked out really well.
Perfect.
Cool. All right. So another rule of thumb. The sun is one light, and every plan starts with one, building from there as needed. Now, even though I was a photography major in college, I was the only photography major in my class. I went to a liberal arts college where I thought I was going to play soccer for 4 years, and I thought I was going to enter the world of sports medicine and be a pro sports trainer. Little did I know that I sucked in biology once I got to college, even though I was very good at it in high school, and that I wouldn't play soccer for 4 years, and that I would spend more time in the dark room than I would in the training room. So I started taking art classes to keep my grades up. I always did drawing and painting, and I had had a camera since I was 6. So photography, when it came around in the 3rd trimester, made sense to just, I have a camera, I might as well take photography. I've done darkroom, let's do it. little did I know that it would eventually become my career. And I've tried over the years to not have it as my career so many times. As I mentioned, I was a photo editor for quite a long time. That was me avoiding being a photographer. Even though I shot on the side, I never really wanted to be a full-time photographer in my head. I always thought, no, you're better at looking at photographs, you're better at directing photographs. Made every excuse in the book. But during that period of time, I used that amazing opportunity of being on set with some of the world's greatest photographers like Harry Benson, who I mentioned, and Albert Watson, who's today still such a humongous influence on me. I was legitimately watching them work from an authority position, not as an assistant. So I was able to see how they were working from an observer point of view, and not as somebody that needed to concern myself with whether they got their turkey sandwich that day and all those other parts. So I used that experience combined with this idea that if I understood what the sun was doing, then I could learn how to do that once I got my hands on equipment myself. Now, of course, I had a speed light in college, and that was pretty much all I knew. My school only had 2 Home Depot silver, $5 lights as our lights for college on what we learned with, and that was all I knew. So I would pay a lot of attention to what the sun was doing, different times of day, for different atmospheric conditions, reflections, refractions, bounced light, direct light, overcast skies, partially cloudy skies, all these things. And then I started buying some equipment as I was getting on and trying ideas out. And that is where I really learned lighting. I will credit my lighting capabilities to the sun. So I've still applied that very much so today, that I still learn from it all the time. I'm always paying attention to what it's doing. And moving out to California, it's such a different quality of light out here. And I pay attention to, year upon year, what is it like? I mean, this time of year, we get these, really beautiful clouds, which is unusual because so much of California is blue skies, excuse me. So I use all of that in my mentality about how I'm going to approach photo shoots. And again, telling those stories through the use of light. And that's really what it always comes down to, is this idea that light helps tell the story of the photograph. And so I'm going to use it to my advantage to sort of prod that little psychological aspect of it and keep things moving for my clients. So on that topic, let's go into our next case study. I've been shooting fitness for about 20 years now. When I left New York, as I mentioned the first time, it was actually to come as the photo editor for Muscle and Fitness, which was based out in Los Angeles at the time. And I sort of made a deal with them that I would shoot, 30% of the time for them, still life only, wouldn't really do much. It would really just be helping them out financially by shooting the products at their offices for them, because I was shooting still life at the time, and it was super easy for me to just pitch that as part of what you get in the package of when you hire Ian Spanier. So I would direct photography, I would hire photographers. I had great relationships with all these people I worked with in New York, and this would be my sort of selling point. Very quickly, that 70-30 split went to 60-40, and then very soon after, it was sort of 30-70 in the opposite direction. What the editors were finding was that it was much easier to hire me because I was on the inside and I understood the voice of the magazine. I understood what they needed to do without them always explaining it. And even to the point that they didn't always have to be on set to oversee what I was doing because they could trust what I was shooting. So fitness has just sort of become something I fell into. I consider myself a portrait photographer at the end of the day. I don't care if it's a Mr. Olympia standing in front of me, or a ballerina, or a businessman, or a celebrity, or a box of pretzels. I'm a portrait photographer. If I'm making a portrait of a pretzel that day, that's what I'm making a portrait of. And that very much so speaks to the kinds of photographers who I've always responded to. Your Irving Penns, your kind of classic photographers who shoot what they see. And I believe that very much. There's nothing wrong with photographers who specialize. I just happen not to be one of them. But the industry requires me to sort of say, this is the box that I'm in. that being said, when I'm on set more now than ever, and a client finds out that I can do the product shot that day as well, it's an asset. But that changes all the time. There was a period of time where that was a negative.
Okay, you just said something I've got to go into.
Sure.
You're already on set shooting project A, whatever that might be, and they find out on set that you can shoot the product shot too. Is that because Ian is smart enough to go, by the way, or is that because somebody haphazardly is browsing your website and goes, oh, damn, he can do product too? I mean, in other words, how does that connection get made?
Sure. Because I pay attention and I offer it. You know, I mean, I was doing a shoot on, it was the one of those places where you can do the indoor skydiving. And the assignment was a guy in a studio as if he was up in the air. Now, I gladly would have jumped out of a plane and shot it live, but they didn't want to do that. So we had like a full-on Hollywood crew, and we were suspending this guy from the ceiling, and he had to pretend that the wind was coming up underneath him, and we had a fan to try to give him a mental idea that wind was coming up. It was crazy. Only in LA kind of moment. And the creative director was talking about how cool the helmet was, and oh man, it would be really great if we could do like a 360 of the helmet. And I was like, oh, we can do that. He's like, how? And I was like, oh, well, I can shoot product and I can light it, and boom, there we go. And we not only shot still, but we did motion of it as well. So, you just have to kind of listen to what people are talking about on set and be able to back up the claim, I guess is probably the right way to say it.
Yeah.
I mean, I will tell you this, full honesty. I don't like video. I don't see the world moving. I see it in stills all the time. I'm constantly snapping in my head. So I will shoot motion when I'm asked to do it, but I much prefer to direct somebody else shooting motion who has sort of my lighting, my vision in mind as a series of stills in motion. So thankfully I work with somebody now who sort of gets that. So when I'm shooting stills, he can shoot motion, we can be a 1-2 punch, and it gives a client, a lot more. Unfortunately, it gets expensive when you start going down that road. So on the jobs where there's less budget, I'll sometimes do it myself. But
okay.
Anyway, okay. So let's talk a little bit about the gym. So here's the scenario. We are doing advertising once again for bodybuilding.com, and these are meant to be ad-friendly, quote unquote, caught moments. So what the client really wanted was this sense of natural occurrences in a gym. And the challenge is, you've got 3 hours at this location to create these scenarios that we haven't scripted yet and convince this fitness model how to act in that way, create a scene that might happen in reality, and really have no basis to where to start. But that's where being an ideas person comes in handy. And I think whenever I'm in these situations, I like to picture a window. What would a situation be if there was a window here? And how can I keep these setups simple given our time frame that we're working with, but still feels more complicated than that? And again, it's sort of making something seem more financially valuable, as opposed to that looks like a cheap shot that was done cheaply. So the advice that I have in these situations is to make the best of any location and to think outside the box. When you walk into a empty room, there's nothing to play off of. So you need to have sort of a creative mindset walking in that you can make something out of nothing at any given time. And the tool that you have to do that, once again, is light. So here's a very flat scenario that we're in. You can see it's all fluorescent lighting. And so everything's very flat and even. There's really not much going on. The most interesting thing is probably the background. At least it's wood walls and not plain white walls. And, there's plenty of equipment around and whatnot. So there's stuff to play off of. Now we're dealing with product, if you think about it. Even though there's fitness model, we're actually selling the protein powder or the BCAA drink that you're going to drink while you're working out. So we need to think of what's the product here along with our fitness model and what would be a situation that we can create. So what you can see here actually goes very much to what we were talking about with the Cam Ranger. There's that iPad, and I'll try different things. I sometimes will have it on a stand. Sometimes I'll use that little Joby. I'll attach it to, a piece of equipment or outside of a car or whatever the case may be, wherever it needs to be so my client can see it very easily. Now, again, this is the old Cam Ranger. The new one is quite sturdier and different and better, much faster as well. So the idea that I had what would this scene look like if we had a window? And again, I don't want to deal with a lot of equipment because we only have 3 hours to get this all done. So how can I work simply and build from there? So I start with one and I start to build from there. So our key light, as you may have seen in the last image, is that rapid box beauty dish. That became our theme for this whole entire shoot. And what I used it was like a small window shining a little bit of light into this dark corner where our model is, having a quiet moment at the gym, pre-workout, post-workout, whatever it's going to be. The other thing that I put in there was just a kiss of warm light coming down the wall, thanks to just a bare head with some gel on it. And that just really to warm up the entire scene because it was very cold and flat given the fluorescent lighting. So I'm overpowering the light, of course, by using strobe, but I'm sort of taking the fact that this is a cold environment and I'm creating a scene that might be what you would see if natural light was actually in this location and it wasn't all fluorescently lit.
Why are you using the flat in between?
The blocker?
Yeah, if you go on that shot where you had the down light and you could see that.
Yes. Okay. So what I'm doing is cutting off the light from the background just slightly. So it's actually cutting off about 3/4 of that rapid box beauty dish from hitting the wall behind our model.
Gotcha. So the wall is just the overhead.
Yes. Okay. So without that, you wouldn't necessarily see that overhead. And if we blasted it with the overhead, then it became too powerful. Our eyes naturally go to the brightest thing in a picture. So if we have a bright background, like I was saying, thank God it wasn't a white wall. That white wall would have been very distracting from her and from the product. So as I mentioned, it's a product shoot at the end of the day. And whether it's her or the can in her hand or whatever the case may be, I need to focus our viewers' attention onto that. So you can see here that, yeah, we get that shadow behind her, but not a lot of light coming from the key light onto that background. And then I take it a step further and I go one more shot, So now I've moved that small bare head with the gel over to the left as if it was just a little corner window, maybe throwing a little bit of light and some nice shadows down onto the wall from the barbells. And then our beauty light is on her with the product, well lit. And again, eye goes to those naturally lit things. So we got the bee on her shirt, the amino canister, and her water bottle as well.
So this is a simple question on that shot. Go back.
Yes.
Did you take the time to lay out the 10-pound staggering down, or was that haphazard?
Oh, you know what? I never even noticed that. That's a good one. I know we put the balls there. They might have just sat that way naturally. I didn't even think we
because I love that.
Purpose, so
okay.
Oh wait, yes, of course I did it on purpose. That's what you want me to tell you. Okay, so what you do in one scenario, it goes into that bag of tricks, and now you can do this again. And that was my point earlier about why I keep that notebook of ideas, because I know that I can always go back to something. It also allows me to speak to a client who might not be able to verbalize what they want in words, but visually they can do it. So if I have a little book with pictures and I can say, wait, do you want this or do you want this? Now we have a good talking point. So I'm applying the same basic idea in this next scenario, which was shot for Muscle Fitness Magazine. And basically what I'm doing here is that same rapid box beauty dish. I've got a bare head, which I'm firing into the ceiling that I'm using as a giant softbox. Okay. If you think about an overcast day, what do you have? A giant softbox. So I use that technique quite often to open a room up. So if I still want most of my attention, and you're going to see in a second with the final image, if I still want most of my light and most of my attention on a very specific part of a picture, but I still need information in that picture to work with in post, or maybe the room goes too dark behind the subject, this is a great technique in order to add more light to a situation and not affect your subject necessarily. Now, the umbrella that's over head is doing a very similar thing. It's a little bit more focused, but I'm doing it on purpose because I wanted sort of a pool of light on my subject. So I'm getting beautiful light on her face, thanks to the beauty dish. And now a pool of light coming from above, which is going to add some nice highlights into her hair and a little bit on what you'll see in a second with the background. And then I've got this third light, which is just opening things up a little bit for a little bit of breath. And why is that not going? Sorry. Oh, sorry. You are seeing that on the screen. I'm sorry. So, so what you can see here is that umbrella essentially is lighting from her hair to the ground. Okay. It's probably 2 or 3 stops under the beauty dish, which is lighting her face and most of her body. Then that third light is just opening up that little bit of information in the background so that we have a little bit more sense of place and it's not just pitch black back there. Does it all make sense?
It all makes sense. Yeah. What's amazing about all these things that you're talking about and being a wedding photographer, this whole, natural light and then adding light to the scene and stuff like that. That's what I have to do. Everything that you're talking about is understanding how to use light. Because it really comes down to that. That's your style, by the way, right? Is you're good at working with light. And that's probably one of the biggest things that I see a lot of photographers really struggle with. They're really good at reading all the specs and finding gear and getting the right camera body. And I've got all the lenses but you've got to be able to manipulate light and use it and
Absolutely.
see how it interacts with each other, how it reflects off surfaces. So that's such an important takeaway with your style of work, right? Is understanding how light works.
100%. And thank you. Yeah, that is a big component of what I'm talking about here. I think at lectures, the most common question I've been asked, and I've heard people ask to other lecturers, is what f-stop did you shoot that at? Who cares? Really, who cares? It has nothing to do with the success or the failure of a picture. It has everything to do with how you manipulated and utilized the tools that you had available to you to make a compelling image. And that's what matters the most. A good image is a good image that needs no words, no description of how it was a good image and why it's a good image. It's why we react to the great images of the world. And now we are flooded with imagery. So to stand out now is even more difficult than before. And don't even get me started on all the filters and all that other stuff. But at the end of the day, if you are solid with your lighting and understand how to utilize light to your advantage, you're still going to be better than any iPhone photographer who's an influencer for the next 5 minutes.
Oh yeah. And like in the wedding industry, that's one of the things that happens for me is I don't care who's shooting what around me, because I know my light's better than theirs. I know that, I'm actually throwing light on the background that they'll never get, things like that. And I completely relate to what you're saying. I got a buddy of mine that's in the chat. He just sent me a text a little bit ago. He goes, I sound like he's listening to me talk about light when he hears you. And it's like we have such parallel understandings of how we use light. And I can't stress it enough for anybody that put the gear away, simplify everything and just learn how to use light, whatever it is, flashlights.
And this is one of the reasons
Yeah.
I really wanted Ian to do this, is because when I first met Ian, and to this day, I still consider Ian to be one of the guys I consider when I think of, I don't want to use the word proper lighting, but just great lighting. Like if you scroll down his website, none of the shots are lit similarly. And yet all of the shots are lit similarly in that they are just lit. Again, I hate to say correctly because there's 9 million different ways you could do it. But each one is just lit like, my God, that's perfect.
They're delicious. It's delicious.
Yes,
light.
they're delicious. And I think
All right, can you guys be my agent, please?
Yeah, exactly. But I think that's a struggle for so many people, is that they do go out and they buy the Westcott light, or they go buy the Pro Photo, and they put it on a stand, and they take a picture, and then they worry about setting A or setting B as opposed to the picture, right? And they just get the picture, and I don't really care what your settings are. I mean, okay, some people want that as a baseline starting point. Like, cool. But the bottom line is you're capturing light and you're capturing what's not light. That's it. That's all you're capturing.
That's it.
Yep.
It is a simple process that has been overcomplicated over the years, for sure. And I think, sadly, I see too many photographers out there, because they've bought a camera, or they bought the expensive gear, or whatever the case may be that qualifies them for, in some way, whether influencer thing or whatever. It's not to knock the talented ones. There are very many talented people out there, but my mentality is I want to be in this business for a long time. I have the influence of a guy who is 80 something years old and still shoots and still sells his images and still is significant. He may not be the household name, but he's been around forever. And if you ask anyone from Life magazine who is Harry Benson, they will surely know. You know his pictures without even knowing that you know who Harry Benson is. And that's something that has always been that sort of echelon that I've looked for throughout my career. And, I would even say you either get me or you don't, and I'm okay with that. And it took a while to get there, but the reality is that yes, the things that I believe that I'm doing with lighting, whether it's in your face or subtle, is important in order to speak as a photographer, and that's how I go about it. So, yep. Okay, so let's get through the rest of these because there's quite a few left. Sorry. So, and I hope these are helpful to you guys. So our next case study is the apartment shoot. Now in New York, I faced a lot of these and still face them out here. This was actually one that was here in Marina del Rey. It was a portrait of a celebrity, and her agent had offered up an apartment for us to shoot at that was available, which is great, free location. Everybody likes that. Tiny apartment, crazy low ceilings. Of course, I couldn't scout it beforehand. I basically just went there. There was carpet on most of the floor, and it was crazy crowded with, and I'm not kidding, the most amount of horse paraphernalia I've ever seen in one location. And I live in horse country in Thousand Oaks, and I don't see this stuff up here. Now, the ridiculous request, of course, was 3 to 4 different looks in this very, very tricky environment. So, solution that I have for situations like this is to always seek out a clean wall. Ideally, it's white. It's not always white. And I always carry black velvet. It's in my kit all the time. Now, I use it as a background. I use it to cover my equipment in the car. I have darker windows in my Jeep, but at the same time, that black velvet makes it pitch black in the back. It's just for a safety aspect. If I'm leaving some stands in the car or whatever, last thing I want to do is get that car broken into. So it's very useful on that end. I've even used it to cover equipment that we couldn't move that was in our background. A couple of weeks ago, we were just on a studio shoot, and there was a forklift that they lost the key to, so they couldn't move it. It was a big orange forklift. And we covered it with the black velvet just to eliminate it. You wouldn't even know that it was that if you hadn't known that it was a big black box for a reason. And thank God I had that black velvet with me to do that. So here's our scene. Now, ambitious that I am, I go for the 7-foot light source in the tiny studio apartment with 9-foot ceilings or whatever they maybe were. You can see that light that's coming in from behind in the windows there. It was a very blue, cold light that was not good, and very color was like green and blue coming in from a bounce on a building plus some trees and everything. It was a mess. And I wanted to eliminate all of that. So for me, strobe is the best way to do that, shooting at a higher shutter speed than the available light that's coming in, so I can just take that away. The couch, you can see, I moved, it actually was along that wall completely. I moved a section of it over, so we've got 2 pieces of couch now. So there's no room in this place at this point, and we're tucked into that corner. And basically, I explained to the actress, you're really going to have your acting skills on today, because we're going to pretend that this is a giant white studio. And this is what we got. Beautiful, clean light on her. And again, the hope is you would never know that we were standing in this room. To everybody else, hopefully they look at it and they would say, wow, what studio did you shoot that at? And that's always my hope. I thought it'd be fun to show you what she was looking at. So I'm right underneath that light. Here's some more of that Western regalia on the walls. Again, I'm using that bare bulb into the ceiling to just add a little bit more power, a little bit more light. It's just an easy way to do it. I only brought, I think, 4 lights on this shoot with me, because I knew I was going to be in a small place. I knew the elevator was tiny. It was going to be a chore, and I didn't want to be dragged down by a lot of equipment. Of course, I can't be satisfied with just one look, so I have to do more than one. And this is, again, using that white wall in a very different way. Now I've changed my light modifier to that Rapid Box Beauty Dish, and it gives a very different feel. Whereas the first one was a big, soft, beautiful light, here we have a small, beautiful light that has a little bit more kick and a little bit more punch to it. And it just happened to work out perfectly that the stylist had brought a dress with these frills, and we could kind of freeze the motion a little bit and kind of give a little bit of a sense. Steve, you had a question? No.
No, I'm good. I love the light.
Oh, thank you. So then that black velvet comes in handy. So you can see even lower ceilings on the area that has wood floors, which would have been great, but couldn't even use that. There's a dining room table right behind it. So I jammed this all the way up into the ceiling. And then again, very ambitiously decided I'm not just going to use a 7-foot umbrella. I'm going to use a 7-foot umbrella and a 43-inch umbrella and stack them to make a big window for my client. So what the light in the back that you see on the right, that again, I'm banging into the ceiling, and I use that to open her hair up because she has dark hair on a dark background. And I knew I needed to just add a little bit more light coming in from a different side to separate her from that background a little bit. And here's how you can see how that worked. So in this case, I turned her to face the 2 lights that were on the left. And you can see how there's information in her hair, and that is thanks to the light into the ceiling, which is acting as a big softbox, essentially. So it saved me from putting another light up. I couldn't even get an umbrella up there because that ceiling was so low, but this allowed me to put some light in that area, and a very clean light at that. Okay, the office, which was another assignment, same client, studio portraits of an actress on multiple backgrounds. We have an office. I talked about it earlier. As soon as they say office, I say, don't put me in the conference room. Is there a coffee table in there? I'm sure there is. We can't move it, this, that, and everything else. Plus, everybody shot in the conference room. That's where they always stick people. So it's like if you do business portraits, get out of the conference room. I mean, I shot for a business magazine for 3 years. They always throw you in the conference room. And I would always take the guy out, put him in the hallway, or I'd bring him up to the roof or the elevator bank or something different than the conference room. That shot of the guy with his hands on the table. Yes, I've done it, but it's been done a million times. So break out of that. What I decided to do that, you know, in office, you sort of know that space is very relative. What they think is an empty office might not be really useful to you as a photographer. It might be very narrow. It might be very high ceilings, but we've got those lights hanging down or the pipes hanging down or a pillar in the room. These are all the things that you have to sort of know are going to be the case that is going to happen to you. So given that, again, I'm walking in blind because I couldn't scout. So I'm just assessing what are my challenges here. I look up, I look down, I look left, I look right. I look at all of the things that are going to stop me from doing what I want to do. Now, my solution, which is what you saw in that apartment, is very similar. Quite often, using big light will give you the appearance of a big space. And even though you're jammed in and the behind the scenes is almost ridiculous, the result speaks for itself because you get the sense of a lot of light, and that's through that catch light, through the way that light hits the subject's face. And all those things really help you get a situation that doesn't look as bad as it actually is in reality. And nobody cares what that challenge is when you're in the reality part of the shoot. The one thing I will say about lenses is, I don't care which lens it is, but you have to have a lens that you can picture in your mind how it works. So that 24-70 speaks to me. I know what a 24-70 looks like at every bit of that lens in my head. And so I know what lens I can throw on my camera when I walk into a situation and be prepared that this is what it's going to look like. And I can rely on that look to, if I have 2 minutes to get the shot done. So this is the reality of the empty office. This is what they are constituting as empty. Now that's my equipment on the right, but that desk is in there. It's not going anywhere. The chairs, obviously I can move. The ceiling, not moving that. So our tall ceiling, all of a sudden, is this, not very helpful, but this is the result. Now, I'll show you behind the scenes on this when we changed background. So this is our wall, which you saw earlier had all the former person's nails from picture frames and whatnot. And here's the clean version of that. Now I shot it vertically, but I knew that I could extend the sides to make it look like a bigger horizontal image. And the big light cutting across her face with the catch light and all that other stuff makes it feel like a much bigger room. I am jammed up against a television on a wall, probably about 6 feet away from her. So it's very tight. So then I threw up the black background, which again, always rely on that. So same light, different background. Now I have 2 different looks for my client very quickly. Now from here, just changed modifiers. I also used those windows and shot some natural light through the window against one of those pillars and extended the background on the pillar to make it look like a cement wall that she was standing against. I'm going to jam through these next ones since I think we're getting close on time here. Next study is the empty home. Quite often in these situations, you're told one thing and it's not the case, just like I mentioned with the air conditioning ducts and all that stuff. So in this case, I was told high ceilings, but I actually got low ceilings. Also got no time. And I shoot celebrities. This is what happens. I anticipate 2 minutes. I always go in thinking I've got 2 minutes or less. Jeff Bridges, I think I shot 17 frames with him, and that's it. And I would say probably, and 2 scenarios, we changed lights once very quickly. But in those 17 frames, I would say probably 14 of 17 are usable. And it's because he was great. He knows what he's doing. And I'm literally just firing away at that point. When that happens, you have to stick with your plan. There's no sense in going away from that plan. Now, the reason I go in with a plan is that if that plan fails for any reason, I've now eliminated one possibility, and now I can move forward instead of scramble and say, what am I going to do? I don't know what to do now. That's my mentality about it, is that one plan that I go in with, if it fails, push it away, move forward. in a case like this, when I thought I was going to have a lot of time, I thought I had high ceilings, this is the lighting I planned. I now have 15 minutes to do 5 setups. You know what? I'm not even going to mess around trying to come up with something else. I'm going to stick with my plan and just go for it and make it work. So here's our behind the scenes. Again, ambitiously jamming that 7-foot stacked on top of a 43-inch umbrella. This is a look that I started using quite a bit, and it really is because it just feels like a big window to me, and it's a great light for everyone, men, women, kids, whatever. It just is a very reliable and easygoing light. And I'm using a ratio between the 2 lights. I mentioned earlier, I think, you know, if you don't have a meter, you absolutely should have a meter. It's part of being a photographer, is understanding how to control that light. And I'm doing that with a lot of intent, that key light is coming from above 2 stops brighter than my light below. And that is mimicking what natural light does. It falls off. It doesn't always just go from the same amount of power from top to bottom. Sometimes it falls off, and that's what I'm recreating. And this is the result of that. Now, we had a giant window to the right. I could have just shot natural light, but I wanted to stick with my plan. And 15 minutes, 5 outfits, just went for it. Very quickly changed makeup, changed outfits, kept the light the same the entire time, changed lenses. That was it. Are we okay on time, guys?
Light. Yeah, you're fine. And we've got questions. I'll hit those at the end, just so that you can get through this. But
yeah, I've got two more I'd love to share with you guys.
Yeah, go.
Okay, so the office studio, I get this quite often, where they say, oh, we have a studio here at the office, and you can do whatever you want. And then you get there, and the reality is they just have some empty space. And sometimes it's great, and sometimes it's not. I have faced those situations where there's people in the office who clearly hate the fact that photo shoots go on in front of their desks, and they give you attitude the whole time, and you got their eyes burning in the back of your head as you're shooting as a nice added distraction. So all these things happen. It's the reality. And in this case, it's celebrity photo shoots too. So you've got that added stress of, am I getting 2 minutes, or am I getting 5, or am I getting 30 seconds? Like, what's going to happen here? So again, that plan allows you to go in, you know what you're going to get, and you can make things work for you. So space is very relative. Small can be big. And as I mentioned earlier, by using those big lights, sometimes that will give you that sense that there is something of a bigger space behind the camera that's giving a lot of breadth to an image. Keep saying it, so obviously I mean it, but this idea of going in with a plan, I cannot stress it enough. It allows you to start from a place of knowing what you're doing and beginning the process with something that should be successful. And it's not like I'm just making it up that day. I've tested these things. I've done it. I know what that light looks like. I can picture it in my head at any time. And so I'm going in with the idea in my head that this is the light that I want. This is the look that I want. And this comes through those questions that I asked the client. This comes from, what's the story I'm trying to tell with this subject? Maybe there's no directive for the editorial, but I know that Jeff Bridges has this kind of a movie coming out. So I'm going to shoot a style of light that speaks to that project that he's about to work on. Or maybe I'm going to photograph the daughter who donated her kidney to her father so he could live. I'm not going to go in and light her like a rock star. I'm going to go in and light her with a soft, beautiful light to help tell that story of a person who is dealing with something that requires some beauty and some grace and all those other aspects. Now, of course, that's going to go into how I pose them or maybe direct them or any of those things, but it starts with, for me, with that lighting. Once again, that black velvet can always, always be your friend. Now, it doesn't have to be that. You can also use white. And that's why I mentioned so importantly of finding that blank wall so often when you're in a home or an office building or anywhere you might be shooting. A white wall or a light colored wall can be a studio wall, very simply. So here's our situation. I basically was like, you know what? I'm just going to use the V flat, and that's going to become my studio for the day. And I was demonstrating the use of speed lights, something I don't do a lot, but basically wanted to show people that you don't need a ton of equipment to get this kind of done. You can do a ton with speed lights. If anybody knows of Nick Fancher on Instagram, his work is amazing. He shows a ton of behind the scenes, and he does so much with just speed lights, just small little light sources. So for those of you who are just, maybe afraid of strobes or maybe just getting started, there's nothing wrong with speed lights. And now there's more and more modifiers available. When I was starting to shoot, I was making things up to modify these speed lights because there was nothing. And now there's a ton of products out there that you can put 1 to 4 speed lights inside. You can throw modifications on them. And that FJ80 that I mentioned from Westcott is kind of like a little bit stronger of a speed light, a little bit bigger than a speed light. And it's an amazing light. It has a modeling light on it. It's got all the capabilities and touchscreen and all that great stuff. And here's the results. So, of course, I did extend the background to make it bigger, which is what white and black allow you to do, and even solid colors. And rather than just look straight on, I took a side step and looked at my subject from the side. So sometimes it's just looking at things differently, knowing that with a face like that, that light's going to hit her and it's going to be great from the front, from the side, anything.
I have to interject on that one.
Sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
And it'll take 2 seconds, but my God, I love that. The fact that the back of the jacket and hair and hat all fall into pure black. I love that. Sorry, didn't mean to interrupt.
No, no, I appreciate it. I'll take kind words all the time. Yeah, one light, okay? And we're gonna talk about that at the very end here, about the importance of 1 and 2 lights. Again, I'll repeat it very often. Just a second quick example of the office studio space. So yeah, this is one of those cases where I've got to create a studio in a very small space. I had great right and left, but not great front and back. So that black velvet came in very handy. Now here's a case where I'm throwing a ton of lights up. I'm using everything in my arsenal here. I've got 3 lights on my subject from the back and 1 light on my subject from the front, and an option for a 5th light as a fill light if needed. And there's the result. Now, angling those lights and understanding how to use those lights is what's key. Now, the background lights aren't changing at all, but as a completely second option, I just moved my light from the side to the center and gave a different feel and a different look, a little less shady and shadowy. And that allowed me to do an action picture of, my subject who also does Kung Fu and all that other stuff. So why hide that part of it? So real quick, before we start going too far into questions, I just wanted to talk about the importance of 1 light solutions. I will just say, these are the just quick points on it. A small footprint is great for small spaces. As much as Photoshop should not be your crutch, it can be your friend, like the office studio example where I extended that background. The added bonus of 1 or 2 lights is speed. It gives you the ability to work quickly. And in the case of the variables like time that affect how much you have your subject in front of the camera, weather situations, and large shot lists, 1 or 2 lights as your plan for the day can come in very handy. So just going to run through a few small examples of 1 light solutions and fire away with some questions while we look at this.
So while you're pulling those through, first question from Kim, for someone just I think she was saying for someone just starting out, what 1 light would you suggest that they start with?
Okay, so
I love that one.
Oh, thank you. Here's how it was done. As I mentioned, speed lights are sort of an easy starting point for photographers from a price point aspect. It's not a huge commitment, and you're still able to sort of get some really great stuff. The thing is with speed lights is you're going to start missing the power. You're not going to be able to do everything. Now there is high speed sync with speed lights, so you can sort of get past some limitations when you're outside. But there's now high speed sync in a lot of strobes and sort of negated that one bonus aspect of it. So from a price point, I would say speed light. I would highly recommend, and you know, biases aside because I work with Westcott, but I would highly recommend that FJ80. I really think that that is a great starting point for many photographers because it is not that expensive. It's got a touch screen that you literally don't have to technically get bogged down. Speed lights can be a lot to deal with and a lot of information, manuals, all that stuff. Whereas this touchscreen and it's just very simple. And you can grow from there very easily. It's a system that has a remote that allows you to take it off camera if you want. You can integrate it with the FJ200 and then the FJ400 if you wanted to start getting into more powerful strobes. And then you're building a system. I started with Dynalights and quickly found that they were not powerful enough for most of the stuff I needed to do. And then I went to variations of Pro Photo until I ended up with Westcott when they started making some strobes. So that kind of gives you the bottom to the top. So starting at speed lights and then on from there.
You mentioned
sorry, I should also say LEDs. Sorry. LEDs are another option if you want to go with continuous lights and you don't want to go with strobes. And there's so many options on that. Westcott was huge on that before they started with strobes. I just recently purchased the Solix 2, which is a bicolor LED, which allows you to affect color temperature and how much power is coming out of the same LED. That said, if you want to be able to freeze action, you want to be able to shoot fast, strobe's the way to go.
Okay. And then you had also mentioned,
Are we done sharing your screen?
there we go.
Yeah, if you want me to go off my screen, we can.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
yeah, that way we
you
can.
would also mention
There we go.
the Westcott, the 80. Based on power, though, if somebody wants to start out and they want their first light to be able to overpower the sun, right? That kind of changes things a little bit. Is the 80 going to do that, or are they going to need to start with the 200 or the 400?
In my ideal, well, sorry, depends how you shoot. If you're somebody that shoots at f2.8 and you want to shoot with high speed sync, yes, you can overpower the sun. Will you have the best quality of light? It's arguable. I don't shoot that style. It's not my way. Yes, you can do it. Yes, I have done it. Yes, I've used that to get past the limitations. Personally, I would like more power always. So I told you about a scenario where I had to go to a foreign country. I had to shoot 28 people as a group shot, and I could only bring 2 lights with me, and that was it. Couldn't even bring stands. I had to borrow stands from the crew on the reality show that was being filmed. It was for MTV. So in those scenarios, what I came up with was I almost always photographed them by a pool. And the reason I did that was I was using the pool as a bounce, a giant bounce. So I had a small octodome, even though that seems strange for a big group. I used it without diffusion, so the light spread, and I used the silver interior as a big reflector. Now I took that second light and fired it into that beauty dish. So I basically doubled the power by firing 500 watts in and 500 watts out. And that allowed me to get more of a blast of light, add to that pool, which bounced light. So now I had my fill. So that was acting as my third light, if you think about it that way. And then I had whatever the available light was. Now, of course, the client would listen to me 4 out of 5 times to say, let's shoot this with the sun behind me, with the sun being my fourth light as a little bit of added help. And then they would challenge me and say, can we shoot into the sunset this time? So now I'm even more challenged because I now have to light people who are silhouetted by the sun, by our eyes, and definitely a camera. So in those cases, I would have loved always more power, more power, more power. What I found with the FJ400s, which is 400 watt seconds each, is that the combination of power and being able to do high speed sync when needed sort of covers everything. I don't always get to use the modifier I want if I really need to blast the sun out. But I'm more of the mindset that I would use the sun behind my subject or over my subjects in those noon photo shoots that I don't have a choice, or shoot in open shade and then light my subject so that I can control a beautiful style of light. I recently posted, I did a shoot for Backstage magazine with Bob Odenkirk, the actor in Better Call Saul. And we're shooting at his house, and it was a little early in the afternoon. The sun was still a little high for my taste. So the first setup I did, I had him in the shade. Now there was sun coming through the trees at the same angle where my light was. And I would just have him lean forward just a little bit to be out of the light so that he was in shade and I was lighting him through the shade. And I used that time to kill a little bit of time so that when the sun started dropping to a different position, I could then shoot something in a different spot in his yard that allowed me to really take advantage of the better time of day. And then in other situations, I just lit him completely with my strobes.
Is that the black and white one on your website? Is that from that shoot?
Yes, it is. Yeah.
Okay. Another question was from David. Editing software. What, I'm assuming you're a Lightroom guy, but also Photoshop for major cleanup?
Yeah. So my workflow is Lightroom is my catalog annually. So I have an annual catalog that I keep everything that I'm doing that year. I use a Drobo unit, which is a self-replicating robot system that basically protects hard drives, and I keep backups somewhere else and all that. So everything goes into Lightroom on my laptop or at my desktop or both. Then it's double backed up because I'm a fanatic about backing up. The client orders the images or whatever. I'm going to process out images from Lightroom. I make tweaks in Lightroom first, then process it out to Photoshop. And then in Photoshop is where I make the major changes. So small changes in Lightroom, big changes in Photoshop. And I do my own retouching. So everything you see of my work is always my own retouching. And it's something that I've found, if I can convince a client to let me see it from start to finish, that's always the ideal. It's not always possible. Sometimes I do have to hand over raw files, which I don't like to do, but
Perfect.
It's the way of the world. Yeah.
Troy, you got something?
Yeah, let's wrap up the recording. And then I'm going to open up the room a little bit and just do a little bit more Q&A and kind of chatting. So, for everybody that's watching us on the recorded version, thank you for hanging out with us. We're going to stop now. If you want to be able to hang out with our guests and us after, you got to come to the live one. You got to be here. So, all right. Thanks, Ian, for being here. Thank you, Steve. Let's go. We'll catch you guys on the next one.